All right, welcome out. So we're moving forward. We've looked at a few of these sections. We looked at the advantages and disadvantages last time. We had the general introduction. So today we're going to look at the common defense. The summaries, as you can see here, they're laid out relatively briefly, even though there's numerous, I want to say chapters, essays that we'll be looking at. Again, we just want to get a cursory overview. If you're so inclined, if you're interested and you want to, I have read the Federalist Papers, the actual, I have a small book, red, white, and blue book. And it has all 85 essays in there. And if you want, I mean, you can go over it, read it through in minute detail. Okay. But that's not our purpose here. We, just want an overview. We want to get familiar with what's going on. And again, I'm not an expert. So if I make a mistake here and there from oversight or whatever, sue me. I'm not credentialed. I'm just looking at this from the perspective of the average American, right? Average citizen who just wants a layperson's perspective on this stuff, all right? And it's very important because it's the law of the land. You don't have to understand it like a lawyer or a PhD or a professor, a scholar. Leave that up to the scholars and the professors and the lawyers. But you do want to know generally some basics. What is the Constitution? Where did it come from? Why the Constitution? Articles of Confederation began things. What were the disadvantages of the existing government? What were the advantages of the Constitution? Right? What was needed? What was missing? And we went over that last time. And there was a list. There was a couple of lists at the end. The disadvantages, I think, in Hamilton pointed them out in 21, 22, if I recall correctly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull those out and put them into a document, a list. It's only going to be maybe a page long. There's maybe about a dozen things, right, that the founding fathers had issues with, thus the Constitution. So there was some shortcomings, obviously, with the Articles of Confederation, and things had to be fixed. And then people say, well, how do you know they were fixed? How do you know they're working? Well, it stabilized. The changes that they made did stabilize things. It just stabilized things in regards to defending the country, waging war, collecting taxes, commerce, and so forth. So it stabilized things. And how do you know it's still working to this day? Because as I said before, the United States is a major stable force in the 170. Somebody look that up for me. The 170 countries that exist in the world, right? The United States has been a stabilizing force for quite some years. As I said, it's where the money is. The money standard is the US dollar around the world, right? The English language is used predominantly throughout the world in many scenarios and situations, such as in many newspapers throughout the world, and computer programs throughout the world. Air traffic controllers use English in their air traffic controller towers. So whatever it is, and you're learning as we move forward, right, that the founding fathers did, it worked. So they were very smart, right? They were able to fix the problem and keep it moving forward many decades, couple centuries later, right? That's great. That's remarkable. So, and if you know something like that, if you know that stuff, then you can tell people, say, well, you know what, the Constitution is old, it's racist, it's outdated, it needs to be scrapped, blah, 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 blah. can tell them that, what I just said. You can also say that people vote with their feet. More people come to the United States than any other country. So people are voting with their feet that, our country is good. It's a good place to be. Therefore, the constitutional republic is a good thing. It's working. It's doing its job, right? All right. Just ask people who lived in other countries, right? My wife is from Colombia. My mom came here from Portugal. My dad and his parents grew up here, but they all came, their ancestors came from Ireland and France. All right. Everybody coming here for a reason, right? Not a lot of Americans going to Ireland or France or Colombia or anywhere else in the world, right? Pretty much staying here. Okay. So that's my little introduction. So let's take a look at this stuff. So the summaries are very concise. And here we have, this is common defense, 23 through 29. So this was one of the issues. Defending the country. Well, when George Washington was selected to be the lead general, the head general, I don't know what they call that. I'm not a military person. The general of generals. He didn't have trained regular soldiers, just a bunch of militia, a bunch of farmers, part-time soldiers, and you saw a bunch of ragtag crews, coming out in their farmer garb. How did they beat this highly disciplined army from England, jolly old England, right? United Kingdom, Britain, really, is the proper term. How did they beat the British? Smarts, understanding weaknesses and strengths. And another thing that Washington did was that he knew that he didn't know, right? It was his first time he was a lieutenant, he was a general, but he wasn't a commanding general of the army. Maybe that's the term I'm looking for. Commanding general, right? So what did he do? Who had the experience? Many of the officers in the field, right, had more experience than him. So he went and talked to them and listened and discussed and learned. There was a CEO one time, I forgot what company he worked for, but he would often come to meetings with a pad, paper, old school, sorry, and sit there very quietly, just writing stuff down. And one time, one of the higher ups said to him, Bob, I see you at the meetings. You're the CEO. Why aren't you saying anything or saying more? He goes, I'm learning. Right? Yeah, there you go. We're all equal in our infinite ignorance. Even if you have a lot of experience, you can still learn. And I'm learning all the time. There's holes in almost everybody's understanding of things, especially complex issues. So don't feel bad if you don't know. If you don't know, I don't know. Students have asked me before, I don't know. If you want to, we can look into it further. I'll look into it further if need be. 23, chapter 23, consisting of 7 essays, addresses itself to the question of how best to defend the American people against foreign aggression. Well, there you go. And the best way to defend people against foreign aggression is probably to have a unified country, a bunch of United States of America, right? And we talked about this before. They wanted to break them down into a whole bunch of, maybe, what was it, 3 or 4 confederacies, right? Not a good idea. Things get complicated. The power is weakened, and it also creates contention. What if 2 or 3 of them want to go to war and 1 or 2 doesn't? And then the ones not going to war are sitting to the side. And then the enemy says to those who are sitting to the side, hey, why don't you come fight with us? We'll pay you. And you can fight, the other confederacies. What? The sense of the common defense was the authority to raise armies. There you go. That's what Congress does, right? Build and equip a navy, direct their operation, and provide for their support. The Confederation recognized this, but lacked the requisite means to carry it out. right? Articles of Confederation. Didn't do it. To raise men and money, it had to rely on fallacious scheme of quota, on a fallacious scheme of quotas and requisitions from the individual states. These should be a single, I'm sorry, there should be a single national government with authority to act without limitation. Because of the impossibility of foreseeing the nature and extent of national emergencies or what means right might be required to meet them. If the proposed constitution were adopted, there is no reason to fear that the central government would abuse such unlimited authority. Well, is that true? There should be no fear. I would never say no fear about any government, right? But anyways, that was the sentiment. If you don't trust, fully trust any government, because nobody ever said that government is run by angels. I don't know of many angels in government or out of government, right? People by default are generally selfish. And power, we know about power. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. The more power you give someone, the more it goes to one's head. And you have to be a very, very, very strong person and a very disciplined person and a very moral and ethical person to not abuse that power. It's very difficult. Why do you think most people go into politics? Those are the people that are like, look, I can get into politics and I can be a leader and get some power. Yummy. And you saw it during COVID. Some of the mayors and some of the leaders just, man, they went fascist. Like the mayor from Chicago, she was talking to her lieutenant generals, I think, and just being really nasty. She didn't get reelected, of course. And that's why we have term limits, and that's why we have elections. Because if that power is abused, that person isn't in power forever and a day. Well, unless you're on the Supreme Court. But even there, you can be impeached, right? So, see, all this stuff, I'm just repeating what's going on, right? I'm a mirror. I'm putting this up. I'm a mirror reflecting back to you the great ideas that they came up with, putting together the Constitution. Anyways, chapter 24, reverting in a rather long essay to the subject of standing armies in times of peace. Hamilton noted that the constitutions of Pennsylvania and North Carolina contained this provision. As standing armies in time of peace are dangerous to liberty, they ought not to be kept up. The constitutions of Massachusetts and New Hampshire, Maryland, Delaware contained similar provisions. That was besides the point, argued Hamilton. Under the proposed constitution, the powers of raising military forces would be lodged in the legislature, not in the executive. Pause, sink in, comprehend, get it, right? So there's your separation of powers. And in the old days, in the old country, you might have seen this, you've probably seen this in other countries. You see the president, who is also the general. He's got the general's 5 stars or whatever star, however many stars they have in any particular country. And sometimes the religious leader is the president, right? You're asking for trouble. And sometimes it's all three: military leader, religious leader, political leader, all in the same person. Now you're asking for trouble, right? And where that has happened, it's been predominantly trouble. Africa has had a lot of those situations. Idi Amin is one I can think of offhand. Africa, Latin America. I know probably not so much in China or Asia. They're a little different about those things. But anyways, Um, yeah, laws in the legislature, not in the executive. And that legislature would consist of representatives periodically elected by the people themselves. There you go. That should provide adequate control. See? So what's to get rid of? What's to rewrite? Do you see how well it works? Fully, I try not to get too, like the last video I made, I was getting a little cantankerous. Go look at the old dude, man. He's getting mad. You know how those old people are. They get all cranky and cantankerous in their old age. Nah, I've been like that most of my life. Nothing's changed. I've actually gotten better, a lot better at not being so angry. So I'm getting less angry in my old age because I'm learning how to discipline myself. I can tell you stories about me when I was younger. Ew, frightening. If we mean to be a commercial people or even to the secure on our Atlantic side, we must endeavor as soon as possible to have a Navy. The Navy would need dockyards and arsenals, and moderate garrisons of a standing military force would be necessary to guard these. True. All right. Again, not a lot of detail here, but we're not looking for massive, extensive, exhaustive detail. Just the facts, ma'am. Just the basics, ma'am. All right, 25. Chapter 25, a great danger to the country came from the fact that territories of Britain, Spain, and various Indian nations encircled the Union. Yeah, that's a problem. Britain to the north, right? Wasn't the French in the north too? Wasn't France up there? I know we got French Canadians. Spain to the south, I know Spain had control of Florida and some other southern areas. Indian nations, not from India, but Native Americans. They're not Indians because Columbus never found the West Indies. He thought that's what he was heading for, but he didn't find the West Indies. So they're not Indian. They're not Native Americans because Americo Vespucci, the country was named after a map maker, Italian guy, Americo Vespucci. So they called this new country America. So they're not Indians. They're not from India. They're not Native Americans. They're not Americans, right? They're actually indigenous tribes people, if you want to know. My father has a little bit of indigenous tribes people in him, in our DNA, somewhere in there, a small percentage. You know. Encircle the, okay. Some states were more exposed than others. So should such states bear all the weight of measures taken to secure their safety? Or should all states join in? There you go. Should all states join in defending national security by means of common councils of common treasury? Standing, much easier to do it that way, isn't it? Much more, you cover your bases better, more easily, more readily, less issues, right? It's just United States is always oh so much better, right? And that's why we've maintained United States, even though there's some division, but there's always division when you got people. Yeah, so what? A standing military force would also be useful in quelling is to put down domestic insurrections, such as Massachusetts had recently experienced in Shays' Rebellion, right? And that was a serious, a real insurrection, not just a bunch of people, a bunch of desk jumpers being guided around the White House by White House security, right? Very threatening. January 6th. Very scary. If you think a ragtag group of Americans without any guns, organization, or power are going to take over a country of this size and complexity, oh my gosh. Go back to school, fool. Right? Good Lord, don't be silly. Don't be infantile. Have a mature mind. Be an adult. Let's go 25 and up. right? 25, you can be a representative. So let's be 25 and up. Let's all act adults, 25 and up, okay? Mature adults. And again, you see these people, these political pundits, and even those in politics, some are just as bad, screaming and yelling and getting all crazy. That's not how adults should be acting, right? Maybe children, maybe under 25, right? In chapter 26, the idea of limiting legislative authority for providing national defense was, in Hamilton's words, one of those refinements which owe their origins to a zeal for liberty more ardent than enlightened. Taking Britain as an example, Hamilton briefly cited what had happened there before, during and after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Glorious Revolution. Wonder who named that? Which dethroned James II for tyranny and abuse of authority. Looks like people named it. For one thing, the king had, in time of peace, increased the standing army in the kingdom from 5,000 to 30,000 men. So this is what was going on. This is what was going on in Europe and Britain most of the time before this country was formed. These types of things, just complete monarchs, despots, tyrants, right? Terrorists. After the revolution, the British Parliament framed a Bill of Rights that contained this article that the raising or keeping of standing army within the kingdom in time of peace, unless with the consent of Parliament, is against law. So there you go. Parliament is the people. That's like the House, right? If you look that up, look up Parliament. And then the Brits, they have an interesting political situation set up. They do like to yell at each other. So it gets a little uncivil, I guess it happens. In chapter 27, a national government along the lines proposed would have less occasion to use force. There you go. So weakening that force and obtaining compliance with its laws than in a loose confederation with no strong central power. 28. See how easy it is when you've got these short little summaries? In chapter 28, seditions and insurrections will now and again occur in all societies and are to the body politic what tumors and eruptions are to the human body. If such emergencies arose under the national government, there could be no remedy but force with means proportioned to the extent of the mischief. Individual states thought their own militias could themselves handle minor commotions, right? In chapter 29, national security demanded that the central government have the power to regulate the state militias and command their services in times of invasion or insurrection. Uniformity in the organization and discipline of the militias would greatly increase their proficiency on the field of battle. The states would appoint the officers of their militias and have the authority of training such forces according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. There was no danger to be apprehended. Excuse me, let me repeat. There was no danger to be apprehended to the political rights and civil liberties of American people by such federal general superintendents of militias. And then the final analysis. In these essays, Hamilton wished to substantiate his main lines of argument, which were two. First, that American security depended on a national system of defense, federal, right? Under the direction and control of a strong central government, federal. And second, that a well-organized military force would not be a threat to the political liberties and civil rights of the people if, as proposed, all armed forces were placed under the control of the legislative Congress. There you go. So in order to guard against the military being under the control, abject control of the king or the executive, the highest power, the president, that's not going to happen. So the Constitution says, if you, king, our president, sir, the executive, if the president of the United States wants to use the army, then he has to go through the legislative, right? That would be the House and the Senate, House of Representatives and the Senate. So they got to run it through the people. And you notice it comes through the House first. and the House is closer to the people. So it comes to the House first, and then the Senate, and then it works its way up to the president. See how that works? So it's always the people at the foundation, right? They're at the foundation of our government even. And since we have a republic, which is a federal and a state government, this government is basically run by the states. Remember when we had COVID? President couldn't just say, hey, United States, do this. He could make suggestions, but it was up to the states to determine. And sometimes the governor got too much power. Probably decisions should have gone through the legislative a little bit more. But the system is good. It's pretty well set up. But the people that run it, not always good. Don't always do things right. All armed forces were placed under the control of the legislature. If such representatives betrayed the people, then the latter would have to right to rise up as they had in their revolution against British rule, right? So that's why, they talk about the Second Amendment and remaining armed. Because even if our own government doesn't do what we want it to do, heaven help us if we have to. And we're so removed from doing such a thing. We've become, it's foreign to most people, grabbing a gun and, attacking your own governments, but that obviously had been done in the past, right? But the thing is, who's the military? When you think about it, the military is supplied by the people. All those in the military, the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Marines, those are the people, right? So do you think the military is going to attack its own people, its family and friends and neighbors? That's something that, and of course, when you join the armed services, you pledge to your allegiance to the United States and to those in charge, up through the ranks, supposed to listen to your commanding officers up through the ranks and do as they please. But at some point, if you are commanded to kill and destroy and maim your very family and friends and the very people from which you came, would you do that? All questions, don't know, there's no answer. I'm not saying I have an answer. I'm saying there's questions. You can propose what people might do, what those in the military might do if they were told to attack the general public. Well, all those military people came from the general public, right? Let's take a look at powers. Powers of taxation. And again, we've got a nice summary here. This section, 7 chapters, analyzes the many problems involved in setting up a just and equitable system of taxation and reconciling the conflicting claims of various taxation authorities at all levels of government, federal, state, local. So remember that's something to also remember, is that there's local, state, and federal, right? Local is like, your cities, your towns, your counties, right? And then state is, of course, the entire state. And then federal is all the states, right? So you have 3 levels of government, right? And so government is pretty big when you think about it. If you think about it all the way down to the local level, local, state, and federal, the government is very extensive, exhaustive, very broad, right? Chapter 30, the national government under the Articles of Confederation lacked the revenues, money, right, necessary for carrying out its purposes because a faulty fiscal system made it dependent on quotas and requisitions from the 13 individual states. A national government properly constituted should have the power to raise its own revenues by the methods of taxation, ordinarily used in every well-ordered civil government, right? So instead of going to the states, and the states do tax, you have state tax and federal tax, but instead of going to the states, hey states, could you give us some money? Can you give us some of that tax money? Can you give us some of that money, please, please, pretty please? No more. It's done directly, taxes and the money that the federal would need to run things, right, would be paid through federal taxes. Adequate national revenues, as some argued, could not be raised by external taxes alone, that is, by customs duties on foreign imports. And that's, if I haven't mentioned that before, customs and duties, and there's other terms that have been used. A lot of times, and I don't mention this, there's taxes paid on imports, right? And the customs house, there's in Boston, when I lived in Boston, and the customs house, that's where the taxes, the ships would come in and you've got, all your goods, and how much of the various goods do you have? Okay, you owe us some taxes, pay your taxes. Pay your taxes here, right? Customs and duties, right? You've probably seen that when you go to the airport, right? The central government should be empowered to levy internal taxes also as necessarily required. In chapter 31, opening the session with a disquisition on the eternal verities of geometry and other sciences, Hamilton observed that politics was not an exact science because it dealt with the unruly passion of the human heart. It's just like economics, right? And therefore tended to be rather irrational. That's one of the reasons why economics is not fully predictable, right? Because there's always incentives. How do people buy things? How do people pay for things? How do people spend their money? How do people make their money? Right? Among the more irrational, Hamilton added, were those who opposed the proposed constitution from fear that the national government, by its unlimited taxing measure, might deprive the states of the means of providing for their own needs. Yeah, that's a problem. So at times, taxes went up before the 80s. Sometime taxes were very high, like 70% tax rates for the wealthy was up around 70%, and that's not good. And that philosophy was used during the Great Depression. Increased taxes, especially amongst the wealthy, to pay for things. But the wealthy are the ones that are creating jobs. They're the ones that own properties for people who can't afford to buy a home. So they own apartments and townhouses, whatever else, homes, and rent them out, right? The wealthy also have money that they put up. Think of Shark Tank, right? Money that they put up for new business ventures. So if you take too much of the rich people's money, you're going to shut down the economy. And that's what happened to a degree. It was indirectly. What happened was that the Smoot-Hawley tariff is a tax on imports, right? Caused a problem. And then that was the solution. So it wasn't actually the rich in the United States who were going to pay for things to help us out of the Great Depression. It was going to be foreigners, right? So let's increase the taxes for foreigners importing goods. So what do foreigners do? We were paying 20%. Now you want us to pay 60, 70%? Bye-bye, United States, right? Secondary effects. So because of that, they're not just going to keep doing business with exorbitant fees like that, taxing them out of their minds, out of their money, out of their livelihood. So those who were importing goods to the United States and trading with the United States said, we're going to take our trade elsewhere. And that caused major repercussions and a worsening of the Depression. Right? Gotta know these things. Gotta know. 2008, we had a serious economic decline that was preventable. But the problem is that our own government was in cahoots with the private banks, the large, Sachs. I always want to say Roman and Sachs. The large investment banks, um, and the corruption therein, right? With these subprime mortgage securities. And those are investments that are just for the uber wealthy, right? If you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of mortgages in one investment vehicle security, right? Who's got that money? Yeah, it's just the elites. So the elites are playing. They're playing a game, and they want to make a lot of money. And the government is funded by the elites. So the government allowed them, the elites, to do what they shouldn't have been doing, and it almost caused not only economic collapse in the United States, but worldwide. Frightening. We'll talk more about that. I'm going to make some video. I think we already made some videos on that. I might have already made some videos on it, but I've talked about that in my classes. The Big Short is a good movie to watch. That really explains it nicely. You got some cameos in there, Margot Robbie and Selena Gomez. Batman's in there, Christian Bale. Gosling is in there, Ryan Gosling is in there, and some other really big name actors. Steve Carell, Michael from The Office. Great movie. I've shown that to my students. Watch that if you really want to know what happened in 2008 with the subprime mortgage fiasco, fraudulence. Chapter 32 states should retain their independent and uncontrolled authority to levy taxes for their own purposes, true, with the exception of laying custom duties on foreign imports and exports or tariffs on any article in interstate commerce. And these are some good terms to know, right? Tariffs, excise, what is it? Excise tax, tariffs. What was the other term? I can't remember that. But anyways, there was to be absolutely free trade among the states, absolutely free, which would stimulate the national economy, right? Yes. And it's all about stimulating economic growth. How does the country grow? It grows through creating jobs by people making money and spending that money, right? So you want people making money, you want them spending that money, you want commerce to thrive, you want trade to unfettered trade in the United States, right, among states, and just keep government out of the way as much as possible. Only there if things become fraudulent or there's contract disputes, right? But otherwise, just liaison fair. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Get out of the way, bro. Money making coming through. Chapter 33, opponents of ratification were raising objections to several clauses in the proposed Constitution. The first of these clauses empowered the national government to make all laws deemed necessary and proper for executing. The power is vested in the national government under the Constitution. The second clause declared that all laws passed and all treaties signed by the national government were to be the supreme law of the land. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Anti-ratificationists cited these clauses as pernicious engines by which their local governments were to be destroyed and their liberties exterminated. Right. Yeah, supreme. And again, you need checks and balances. Right. Whenever anything becomes dictatorial, like dictatorship, that's got to be squelched. That's got to be knocked out, knocked down, inhibited. Hamilton dismissed such views as gross misrepresentation. Hamilton was not a fiscal conservative. He was all about, well, he was the Secretary of Treasury, right? The money man, right? He was greatly responsible for helping us to get out of massive debt after the American Revolution. Power is the ability over the faculty of doing a thing, and the ability to do a thing rests on the power to employ means necessary for its execution. Does that seem very obvious? That just seems like a very duh kind of statement. Sorry. This was true in the matter of laying and collecting taxes. Though a law laying a tax for the use of the United States would be a supreme law that could not legally be opposed or controlled. Yet a law preventing the states from collecting a tax could not be supreme law because it would be unconstitutional. Well, you know, a lot of this is just common sense. A lot of it's common sense. Chapter 34 takes up the subject of concurrent jurisdiction in the matter of taxes. Under the proposed constitution, the right of the national government to raise necessary revenues would be altogether unlimited, while the revenue-raising power of individual states would be only moderately circumscribed under the plan of concurrent jurisdiction. Each would have its field, and there would not be any sacrifice of the great interest of the union to the power of the individual states. Right? Altogether. So the federal altogether unlimited, right? And the states would only be moderately circumscribed under the plan of the concurrent jurisdiction, right? Chapter 35. Hamilton posed a question here. What if the national government, as some propose, should be empowered to raise revenue only through custom duties on foreign imports and exports? That was the word, customs. Customs duties, right? So the custom house, there's actually a custom house, probably several, in Boston, right? And I visited Boston. I lived in Boston for about 5 years, and I walked the Freedom Trail. Put that on your bucket list. You walk the Freedom Trail, you see the USS Constitution, you see Bunker Hill, which is actually Breed's Hill. It was misnamed, but they still call it Bunker Hill. You see Paul Revere's house. You see the graveyards, you know, where Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and many others are buried, right? Lexington and Concord, where the shot was heard around the world, right? The shot that led to the revolution. And a lot. Boston is just full of great sites. The North Church, one if by land, two if by sea, right? Great stuff. Great stuff. I loved living there, and I walked the Freedom Trail half a dozen times. It's an all day thing. So plan a good 8, 9, 10 hours at least, right? You know, so you got to start early, maybe 8, 9 in the morning, and just go. By the time you're done, you're done. You're cooked. It's a lot of walking, and it's just a trail. It's a line. I think it's yellow, right? And you just follow all the way around. It goes miles and miles, very far. It's a great experience. One of the greatest experiences of my life. Where was I? In want of any other source of revenue, such duties would undoubtedly have to be raised higher and higher. This would encourage smuggling to the detriment of law-abiding merchants and other businessmen. Higher tariffs would bring higher prices on many essentials that would adversely affect consumers. Protected by a high tariff wall, domestic manufacturers would enjoy an improper and premature monopoly of the markets, which would unbalance the economy at the expense of other interests. The idea of actual representation of all classes and interests in the legislature was altogether visionary, said Hamilton. It was impossible to have members of each different trade and occupation seated in the legislature. There you go. Nor did mechanics and other wish to be seated. In general, such people were inclined to cast their votes for merchants, knowing that the merchant is their natural patron and friend. We must therefore consider merchants as the natural representatives of all these classes of the community, right? Merchants are people in business, those in the private sector, not the public sector. All landowners, from the wealthiest landowner to the poorest tenant, had one bond between them: to keep taxes on land as low as possible. So what did it matter whom they chose to represent them, whether men of large fortunes or of moderate property or of no property at all? From all the above, Hamilton concluded that the spirit of the government would be best served if legislatures were composed, as most were, of landholders, merchants, and men of learned professions, by which he meant lawyers in particular. And then you go, oh, business people and lawyers, landowners. Aren't you talking the wealthy and the elite? What about the common Joe and Jane citizen? So some might disagree with that. Chapter 36, the author continued to develop his thesis that in the political nature of things, the national legislature, like the state legislature, would consist almost entirely of landowners, merchants, and members of the learned professions who would truly represent the desires and interests of all the different classes and groups in the community. Landowners, merchants, and members of learned professions. So this sounds a little bit like the elites of Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic was about the intelligentsia, the smarts, or the learned, the well-positioned people, landowners, merchants maybe, running things, not the lower worker class. Oh, no, 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 Monfer, right? So that has kind of an elitist bent to it. Is that good? Even the what's the word I'm looking for? The phrase I'm looking for. The college. Electoral college. There we go. I don't know why. Brain fart there. Electoral college. The electoral college is kind of an elitist entity as well, because these are electors. These are people who are actually elected to place the votes. In general, and generally speaking, generally they place their votes for whoever won a particular state, right? If Democrat wins the state, then the electors all vote that direction. If a Republican wins the state, then the electors vote in that direction, right? So, the will of the people, but that's not hard-coded into the Constitution, right? So you can see where there's some problems with this issue. It has been objected, Hamilton noted, that the natural government's power of internal taxation could not be exercised and advantage from lack of sufficient knowledge of local circumstances. That supposition was entirely destitute of foundation. All that was required of inquisitive and enlightened statesmen was a general acquiescence with the resources and the different kinds, resources and different kinds of wealth, property, and the industry in various parts of the country. Also, in collecting internal taxes, the national government could make use of the tax apparatus already operating in the individual states. This would avoid the need for double sets of revenue officers and duplication of their burthened by double taxation, which the people might resent. State revenue officers could be attached closely to the union by which the national government supplement their salaries. As to poll taxes, which were enforced in many states, Hamilton confessed his disappointment in them, adding that he would lament to see them introduced into practice under the national government. On the other hand, the national government should have the power to impose poll taxes in case of need, for such taxes could become an estimable resource of revenue of the nation as a whole. And then the final analysis. Hamilton's ideas about a proper national tax structure are interesting, especially in view of the fact that he soon began putting them in effect when President Washington appointed him as the first Secretary of the Treasury. There you go, right? As I said, in this section of essays, Hamilton was ingenious, if not always convincing, true, in arguing his main thesis that the national government, as proposed under the new Constitution, should have altogether unlimited authority to levy taxes on all things in whatever ways it thought best. But the government should use prudence and caution in exercising that authority. I'll say, whenever you throw in unlimited authority, that's problematic. Just that phrase, that term, right? Anti-Federalists objected, of course, that such blanket authority would place the states and the general public at the mercy of the national government. That's the problem, right? Hamilton denied this, saying that the authority would be exercised by the people's representatives in the Congress, who would be trusted to act with discretion. So the people are electing representatives in Congress, in the House, in the Senate. And if they don't do what the people want them to do, state by state, then they don't get reelected or they get impeached. If one set of representatives did not, the people could elect another set. But this, as Hamilton failed to mention, was easier said than done. True. There you go, right? Because once in power, it's difficult to pull people out of power. And you know, there are dark forces afoot, subversive forces afoot that is not generally spoken of. But people who have worked in politics and been in politics for some time know about what's going on. Right? Now, everything is not on the up and up. It isn't always what you see is what you get. Right? There are those in the back rooms, you know, who are controlling things, and those would be the people, the elites with the money, right? Few disagreed with Hamilton's view that, in the beginning at least, national revenue should come largely from external taxes, at least in the beginning. Custom duties and internal taxes in the form of excises in specific articles. Hamilton suggested that an excise in the making of ardent spirits would be not only profitable but socially desirable, for it would tend to curb the drinking spirits as alcohol of hard liquor, notoriously a national extravagance. In one of his first acts at the Treasury, Hamilton proposed and Congress approved an excise tax on makers of ardent spirits, which soon led to the Whiskey Rebellion by small distillers. So, you know, for every force, there's an equal and opposite force or return. In Western Pennsylvania, neighboring areas, a rebellion that Hamilton as a major general helped to put down. Well, there you go. Hamilton did rather well in explaining chapter 34 that no conflict could arise between the national government and the state governments about taxation because of concurrent jurisdiction, and rather complicated concept. The national government's tax laws were to be the supreme law of the land and not to be contravened in any way. At the same time, the states would retain, with two minor exceptions, independent and uncontrolled authority to levy taxes as they saw fit for their own purposes. The somewhat complex plan of concurrent jurisdiction, it must be said, has worked rather well with relatively little conflict or confusion. So once again, founding fathers, very wise, more times than not, even though there's still problems that persist, such as the Electoral College and some of the issues therein. Generally, overall, it's a good document. The Constitution, the laws of the Constitution work well, and the checks and balances, right? And the controls that the people have over the government and who's governing and the powers therein. Hamilton took a patrician view about the proper management of public affairs when he declared that the national legislature not only would be, should be composed predominantly of merchants, landowners, and men of learned professions. These groups were experienced in large affairs and would truly represent all classes and interests in the countries. Would it? Said Hamilton. He went on to ask several rhetorical questions. Would not the landholder know best how to promote the interests of all landed property, large and small? Would not the merchants be disposed to cultivate as far as may be proper the interests in the mechanic and manufacturing groups with whom he did business? Would not the man of the learned professions, being neutral between contending economic groups, be ready to promote the general interests of society? Thus, everybody's interests and problems will be taken care of. This was the British concept of virtual representation. All of this may seem politically naive, but it was not. Hamilton believed in rule by appropriated elite, and throughout his career worked to keep it that way. Yeah. So yeah, Hamilton, kind of an elitist, obviously. I mean, are these, as I said, are these individuals and groups angels? Are they always going to be doing the moral and ethical thing? No, of course not. So either Hamilton was naive, or being of the elites, he said, let's get me and all my buddies in control. Right? Or did he? All right, so we're moving forward. That's it for now. Next time, we'll look at difficulties in framing the Constitution, some of the general powers, structure of the new government. Then that we'll do those three, I guess. Then after that, we've got the House of Representatives. Then you got the Senate and the executive. We'll talk about those three separately. Then the judiciary, 4 areas of government. Then that's it. All right. So that's it for now. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.